Hello, everyone, and we're glad you can attend Attitude's weekly Experts webinar. Just a quick introductory note before we get started. If you've listened to one of our webinars before, you'll know we've been experimenting with adding a certificate of attendance. When the webinar ends, a post-event survey will pop up. It will list 3 questions about the quality of the webinar, followed by 3 questions titled Required for Certificate. If you would like a certificate of attendance emailed to you, then you should answer those 3 questions. If you don't want a certificate, well, then you don't have to answer them. Today's topic is important for educators teaching children with ADHD and parents raising them. Supporting and encouraging kids with ADHD in the classroom requires knowing the reasons why they act up or don't complete assignments on time or may have trouble doing homework or returning it. Getting a solid education about ADHD and how it looks in the classroom is a great place to start. Today we have education expert Chris Zeigler Dendy here to enlighten us all about how ADHD symptoms affect kids at school and what we can do to maximize their learning experience. She'll talk about the challenges and the best practices for dealing with them. Chris is a former educator, school psychologist, and mental health professional with 40 years of experience. She was inducted into CHADD's Hall of Fame for outstanding contributions to the field in 2006. Her popular books, many created in collaboration with her son Alex Zeigler, including 3 editions of teaching teens with ADD, ADHD, and executive function deficits, among others. Her new book, Successfully Launching ADHD Youth into Adulthood, co-authored with Ruth Hughes, will be published in early 2020. You can ask questions of Chris anytime during the webinar. We will try to get to as many of them as we can. To download the presentation slides of the webinar, click the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources on the bottom left of your screen. If you do not see the Event Resources tab, you probably need to refresh the page. So now finally, let me turn it over to today's expert. Chris, it's great to have you here today to help us all out. Certainly we need it.
Well, thank you, Wayne. I'm always delighted and honored to be invited to speak at one of your Attitude webinars. So I especially appreciate you, Wayne, and Lily, and Susan for including me. So starting with my first slide, sometimes I like to start with the end in mind, and that's what I've done here. These are the common problems that teachers are already seeing, and then I'll go back and explain why they're happening, and then give you tips on how to address them. So let's look these over. At least 90% of our children will have some sort of academic problems during their school years. And part of that, if you remember your ADHD research, is that there's a 3-year delay in brain maturation for many of our children. So they have problems with oral expression. They have problems being articulate. You ask them a simple question, and maybe 30 words later, they still haven't given you an answer. Written expression, writing essays, summaries, is a huge challenge for our children. Over half have that particular challenge, including my own son. Math calculation, oh my, problems memorizing multiplication tables, memorizing anything for that matter. And again, all these issues go back to deficits in executive functions. And I will talk more about that in a bit. Spelling is hard. And again, you see a certain number of children who are going to have difficulty with spelling words. Again, that's a working memory executive function issue. And if you see my note in the margin, if you want more detailed information, you can visit my website and read my article on executive function. Now, listening comprehension. This is clearly known to most parents and teachers too. You tell your child something, and 5 minutes later he seems to have forgotten it. That is not simply a matter of choice, as we often believe, but it's because they have limited working memory. We talk about reading comprehension. They can't hold the information in mind that they read. And I know I've had Alex tell me, Mom, I read the whole page and I can't remember a thing I said. Now, the next one doesn't affect as many of our children. 28% have something called slow processing speed. My son Alex struggles with that too, and what that means is they're going to read more slowly, write more slowly, and so when it comes to finishing assignments and finishing tests, it's going to take them longer. And so there are accommodations that will be necessary to help even the playing field for these children. So our children can't rapidly name colors, sometimes letters, or just objects. And there are ways we can help them with that. So moving on, I particularly, and I think attitude folks do, particularly like the graphic that the ADHD iceberg presents, because what it explains to you is that for years we misunderstood and thought that ADHD was only impulsivity, difficulty paying attention, and hyperactivity. Well, that's just the upper third above the waterline. But for most of our children, they have these many, many things: working memory problems, time impairment, always late, not responding to discipline, executive function deficits. And I had a great opportunity to work with Wayne, and we have adapted a free download from Attitude that you can find at their website and download it, and it will be easier to read. Now, I realize you can't read this, or you can get a full version available at my website. But now the main point is 2/3 of their challenges are hidden beneath the surface. So our children look normal. They look like there's absolutely nothing wrong. And I will also let you know that I have been contacted by a French psychiatrist, a Portuguese medical student, and at this point in time, I have 7 translations of my ADHD iceberg that within the next 3 to 4 months, I want to post on my website to be downloaded free. We have Vietnamese, we have Arabic, we have Spanish, we have Greek. So this to me is a really exciting way of helping other countries too. Okay, let's take a look at the brain. Now, we know that the ADHD brain matures more slowly based on solid scientific research. But what you may not know is that the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is the slowest to mature. So just look at what that controls: attention, memory, impulse control, reason, logic, problem solving, planning ahead, and goal setting. Now, does any of this sound familiar? Is there any wonder that our children struggle with these issues? So we really need to have, you as teachers and parents need to have a good understanding of the brain chemistry issues that are involved in our children's lives. Next, let's talk about executive function. I like to describe it this way. It's comprised of these components: working memory. Now, this is huge and perhaps the most important executive skill. Holding information in mind, manipulating it, sequencing it, organizing it. So if a child cannot do that, they cannot write essays, they cannot complete complex math, they cannot remember what they read. So this is huge. Then you also have internal self-talk, which is your brain talks to yourself. For example, when I got up this morning, my brain was talking to me and saying, okay, you need to get ready for the webinar. You need to get everything together. You need to be sure that you have all your notes, and you need to go upstairs and log on at 11:30 today, Central Time. So the point is, this is the same voice that would tell you, if you were a child, to get started on your homework. But because it's impaired, our children's self-talk doesn't work that way. It's very unreliable. It doesn't always tell them to start on homework. So there are some tips I'll give you to deal with that. One of the second item there, initiating, that one shocked me because for years I yelled at my poor son, God bless him, because he could not get started on his homework, and I thought it was laziness and choice. And you can imagine my embarrassment when Dr. Russell Barkley says, our children have trouble getting started, and it's an executive function skill, and it's not just choice. They don't have enough brain chemistry to help them get started. So the next one's analyzing, synthesizing. That goes along with writing essays or problem solving. Then the next item, organizing and prioritizing. It is very difficult for them to organize. It is difficult for them to organize their materials. The emotional control issue is one of great importance. Unfortunately, it is not listed in any of the official diagnostic criteria, in spite of the fact that the leading expert in the world, Dr. Russell Barkley and others like Dr. William Dodson, have argued that it should be, and we'll talk more about their sensitivity to rejection and failure, and it stays with them longer than the average child. The next item, inhibiting and shifting. Our kids, once they become hyper-focused on one topic, have trouble shifting away. Self-monitoring, oh, goodness gracious, just forget that in high school, at least for my son. They have great difficulty doing that. I remember the first time Alex ever made a list of a to-do list, and it was he came home from college one weekend, and I was just thrilled. It was like wanting to throw a major victory celebration. Even though it was about social events, I thought, good, he gets it. He's got to make lists to remember. And then task monitoring and task completion. I like to divide the practical impact into two segments. As a former teacher and school psychologist, if a child can't write essays or complete complex math or has problems with reading comprehension or memorizing words, multiplication tables, or languages, or has difficulty completing long-term projects on time, I see those as academic problems that I can actually help him with. So I don't make any kind of judgment there. But what I did incorrectly is that these academically related skills, I thought, until I learned better, that they were done by choice or were not done because of laziness. But look at this. They have trouble following directions. They have trouble being organized. They have trouble getting started, remembering chores, analyzing and problem solving, planning for the future, and controlling emotions. All of these are related to executive functions, deficits in those areas. So what I hope teachers and parents are understanding is that these issues need to be addressed, but you need to put supports in place or practice replacement strategies. In fact, for example, if you have to help them organize their notebook, or as my sister does at her school, she has them keep she teaches high school. She has them organize a notebook, and each day they correct it, and they do it in partners so that one student is teaching the other because teachers can't do everything. So here is one of our take-home messages. Our children have unreliable working memory and limited self-talk. So what that means is you can't count on them to remember much of anything. So if you want your child or student to be successful, you have to give them external reminders. These have to be things that you can see or hear. An alarm clock, an alarm on your watch, an alarm on the computer, a Post-it note. I used to put Post-it notes on Alex's steering wheel to remind him of things. Or someone, hopefully not somebody that's screaming at you like this guy, but maybe a friend will call you or your mom will remind you. Something done in a friendly manner. Our children have not chosen to have ADHD, and we need to work with them as partners. I love football, so this football analogy was perfect for me. What we see is what I call the difference in chronological age and in a developmental age. So, for example, if my son was 12 years old, as you can see there in the third column, then his executive age, ability to be organized, plan ahead, etc., is going to be more like an 8.5 or 9-year-old. So the brick wall is hit in middle school because as a middle school teacher, I would look at a kid and I'd say, you're 12. You should be able to remember to bring your assignments home and complete them and then bring them back to school. But here's the rub. This is not realistic for these children because of their developmental delay. So what I hope one of the outcomes of this session from teachers is that you realize you are going to have to put more supports in place and accommodations in place for these children than you originally thought they need. And that was especially true for me as a parent. I'm a professional, and I'm thinking I shouldn't be having to remind my son about his homework. So anyway, the main things he will have problems with are organization, independent work, emotional control, and all of those issues are critical to their well-being. All right, here's another take-home message. If you look at the ADHD diagnostic criteria and the executive function deficits list, if you punish a student for any of those things, you are punishing him for his disability. For example, if he's forgetful, if he forgets to bring his homework or loses it, please give him visual reminders, either through the computer, phone, Post-it notes, or what have you, and verbal reminders from teachers, students, and friends. All right, here are 5 common reasons, again, for school failure: not doing homework, getting zeros, failing tests, forgetting assignments, tests and long-term projects, not taking notes, difficulties copying from the board. These are the main things. So I'm going to keep moving along to intervention strategies. Here are some tips for homework completion. Many of our children have trouble keeping assignment books, so have another student check his work. Or my favorite is to appoint a row captain for each row in your classroom. The row captain goes down the row at the beginning of class, takes up homework. At the end of class, they go down the row and they point to my son or my grandson's paper and say, you need to write down your assignment right here. This will help everyone, and that's so often true about these suggestions that I make. It helps all students. Now, if the child has trouble taking notes, then designate a classroom note taker, and after they take the notes for the class, and, you know, the child with ADHD may take some notes, but they won't be complete typically, so then the student who made the original notes will give that child a copy. A couple of my favorite things about remembering homework is for teachers to use the remind.com software, which is free. In other words, if I'm the teacher, I can send to you as a parent and to you as a child what your homework assignment is, so there's no doubt at home. Our students can also take pictures of the assignment on the board. So there are a lot of things. I always went to PTA and asked the teacher, his classroom teachers, do you have any long-term projects, and what is your homework pattern? And they would proceed to tell me. So I would know that for algebra, I should expect homework 4 days a week, and that once during this semester he will have a long-term project. So these are generally the kinds of things, you know, I'm not going to go over all of them, but generally the kinds of things that will help. Now, our children don't instinctively know how to write essays or how to take tests And what Dr. Don Deschler and his students have found out, he's a professor in the Midwest, is that if you teach or practice test-taking strategies, that the test scores will go up. And here are just a few things. I didn't list them all. Try brain dumping. That was my favorite in college. I'd walk into a history class, my worst subject, and I knew he was going to ask a date. So as soon as I got my paper, I wrote down the date at the top of the paper. Also, they need to check to make sure that there's not a front and a back to the questions, to the test, because we've had students complete the front, think they're totally finished, and then end up missing a lot. They also say don't go back and change answers, according to the research, and figure out is one worth more than the other, and if so, spend more time on that. But these are just little things that you as a parent or teacher can help with. Now, here's the biggie. I've known at least a couple of kids who forgot their long-term projects. One was one of Alex's classmates, and he had been a state championship wrestler, but he could not wrestle. So here are some tips for teachers. Modify the assignment, break it into 2 or 3 segments with different due dates, so that decreases the likelihood of failure because he would get grades on each segment. Prompt him and absolutely notify the parents. And if a parent doesn't think of it, you as a teacher suggest that be in the IEP or 504 plan. And you're going to, I use the word teach to schedule time backwards, but that's really a misnomer. When we say teach, we think all I have to do is show you how to do this 1 or 2 times and you've got it. The reality with kids with ADHD and executive function deficits is you have to practice, practice, practice. Provide a job card. These are the exact steps you have to do to complete it. Give them a graphic organizer that helps them see the key material. Show them a completed model of the project or reports, because what they found is that the quality of the projects and the reports improve. Now, here's a sample of a graphic organizer that I created in my Teaching Teens book. And the reason I did this is because a high school student was given 2 pages of instructions single-spaced. And he and his mom sat down and pulled out the key points because our kids have trouble finding the key points. And then they developed an action plan from this. Now, again, this is like a Cliff Note versions of how much time I would really like to spend with you on all of this. Now, this is a weekly project planner. What you're trying to do is make time concrete, make it visual. In other words, if your project is due on the very last day, or like, I can't even read this print, it's so small, the last day of that last week, then you're going to count. All right, you have 12 things to do. Let's schedule them backwards. And so at least then he knows when he should start, and then he can check them off. There's always something satisfying about checking them off. Now, let's talk about memory strategies. Clearly, I thought Alex couldn't memorize, but later I realized, yes, he can, but you have to practice strategies with him and give him some accommodations. Things like keeping instructions brief, providing guidance in writing. I particularly like the foldables. Do you see the white notebook paper on the right there? That, in other words, this is one related to math. So on the top flap, you name the theory or whatever, and then underneath it, you write what it means. And what happens is, because it's all concise in one place, and they have to create it themselves and think about it, there is an increased likelihood that they will remember it. I also like to do cues. Class, this is important. In other words, listen up. Or I like it when you give them a number. Remember 5 things. I do that to myself all the time. And one of my favorite, the late Claire Jones, used to say, use wild and wacky. Same and similar is boring, and they're not going to remember it. Now, brain breaks or movement and exercise also helps. So you can have kids walk to the water fountain and back. You can have them raise their hands and answer. You can have them do jumping jacks by their chairs. But what that does is it increases blood flow to the brain and helps them think more clearly. Okay, this is a tough one. Social skill deficits are common with about half of our kids. I don't find it to be quite as true for our students with ADHD and attentive. And what I've learned, and I've been researching this for our new book, is the boys' world revolves outside of school, and the girls' world revolves in school. So these are the kinds of things that they need to do to get along with that group of girls. And smiling and being friendly is important to girls. It's not to boys. But boys like activities and sports. And for example, so if your son knows a little bit about sports, help him catch up with the local one-loss season. If he wants to play ball, practice with him so he can get better. Some of our kids are not well coordinated. And I know some of you worry about your child only not having many friends. But what we know from mental health research is that one good friend is protective of a child's mental health. So invite one friend, someone who seems most likely. If you are friends with their parents, talk to them in advance about, my child really needs to have friends. Can you help me help your daughter understand so that they can be friends and enjoy each other's company? Or take them to a concert together. Now, I have learned something new. I don't know enough about this yet, but Dr. Barkley has recommended developing a friendship coach program. He has created a program for teachers, and I haven't had time to research it all the way, although I contacted the creator, helping our kids become more aware of feelings, reducing bullying, identify one skill, role play that, and give them the words, the simple scripts. And like I say, there's one for parents, but I can't really find exactly what that offers. This reminds me of social emotional learning. And I know one of my friends in Atlanta, Rachel Cole, is actually implementing social emotional learning in some of the Atlanta schools. To me, this is an exciting concept. Greater emotionality and sensitivity to rejection. Dr. Dodson has been the one to bring this more to our attention. And I do know that, for example, in a crisis, that my son was likely to overreact. For example, if they break up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you better be prepared to have a crisis plan in place. They will ruminate, get stuck on it, can't move on. But what you have to also remember is that emotions like anxiety, anger, fear, produce brain cortisol, and that blocks learning. So if a child is in a classroom where a teacher criticizes them, uses sarcasm, calls on them unexpectedly, that child is not going to be able to think clearly and do well, which is really sad. So if you know that you want to figure out what triggers the blow-ups. For example, if you know it's a boy who's been bullying him, then encourage him to sit somewhere else and avoid eye contact with them. Teach them to practice using visualization. Use a social emotional learning program to make them aware of their emotions. And planning for a blow-up. You know, we had a plan for Alex. If you run into him and her after they broke up, her new boyfriend, you have a pass to go to the guidance counselor. Well, God bless him, he went to the guidance counselor, and there was no guidance counselor there. So they had a huge fight in the hall. It was not fun for any of us. I also would like to call your attention to this little book that I have found that is a wonderful teaching tool, I think, for middle and even high school and younger. I Know What to Do, and it's kind of emoji, cartoon-like figures. I know what to do when I'm anxious, and it lists specific points. And it's kind of like a flip chart, a colorful flip chart. So I bought that at Amazon. I would encourage you to check it out if you think it might be helpful to your child. Okay, effective teaching strategies. Paired learning. That means, okay, let me back up. Our children tend to be superficial learners. In other words, they do the homework and go, I got this. But here's what one of Alex's algebra teachers did. For example, if I were your teacher, I would say, okay, Wayne, you and Lily create a math problem like the one I did on the board. And, the teacher would walk through the steps. And then you would get an answer. And then you would create a blank problem, a blank of the problem you just did. Then both of you work the problem and compare answers. And if you don't get the same answer, you have to discuss it. And guess what? Discussion of issues like this increase the learning capacity. Peer tutors, teacher aides can help. Group response, I love. Turn your thumbs up if the answer to this question is yes, or stand up if your answer is yes. And again, you're increasing blood flow. Hands-on learning, anything that you do where you're moving. I love dry erase boards. The teacher asks the class, and this is low tech. ADHD is laziness by choice, and so the kids would write on their whiteboard true or false, and then they would hold it up, and you would know at a glance which students are not quite with you. I also want to, the one thing I didn't do, I can't believe I didn't, was include something on written expression. But our children have problems holding information in mind. So what I suggest you do is let him dictate information to a scribe, or dictate it to a computer, or dictate it to his mother at home, so that he can then go back and edit and reorganize it, because they just cannot hold the information in mind. Basically, they may understand the grammar and do quite well. If you click on my link on this page, it takes you to my authors page, where there must be 10 or 15 different articles that I've written. And I have written one on written expression and how to help them be successful writing essays. Okay, we all know behavioral strategies do not work as well with our children. I mean, you get all excited, you have a consequence, and it works for a couple of weeks, or a reward, and then it no longer works. Well, here's why. It's, again, a brain chemistry issue. So you have to intervene at the point of performance. If you're a teacher in first period and you tell the student, don't forget your homework at 8 o'clock that morning, you say it to her, you're wasting your breath. Someone has to meet him at the locker at 3 o'clock and remind him of what he needs, which books he needs to get. Now, maybe he can set an alarm on his watch. Maybe his girlfriend, best friend will meet him, or maybe you have a teacher's aide. But you, again, need to give them external reminders or alternative behaviors. For example, I've written an article on blurting. If you know someone's going to blurt, then say, okay, when you have an answer, raise your hand. So they're going to do something, so you want to give them an alternative. Or maybe you give them so many tokens where they can speak, or at some point as they progress, you let them write down what their comments are. There are certain high-risk times when kids get in line to go to lunch or out to PE. And if you can't change the behavior, change the environment. For example, I can't change the fact that Alex was always late, but I can certainly text him to remind him of something that he needs to do, or that it's time, that it's nearing his curfew time. This is another important thing. Punishment. My 8-year-old son looked at me and he says, Mom, I'm sorry when you punish me, but it just makes me want to be badder. Badder, not better, badder. So the point is, punishment does not work with our kids, because the issue is a chemistry issue. It's a white matter brain issue. It's a neurotransmitter issue. So It's not going to grow more white matter. It's not going to increase neurotransmitters. It's not going to teach new skills. So you must practice new skills and compensatory strategies. I'm an optimist, and based upon my own experience as a former teacher and a school psychologist, succeeding in school is one of the most therapeutic things that can happen to a child. It is part of a therapeutic plan, because children who are successful in school are not going to act out. They have no reason or little reason to act out. And one last thing before I close is for any of you that live in the Southeast, I'm co-chair of our annual ADHD conference in January, and Dr. Barkley's speaking. We have wonderful sessions for teachers and for parents. We have the director of the Emory Autism Center coming. It's an exciting program. So if you are interested in this, please contact me, and I would be happy to send you information. And that's all for me, Wayne, so
okay.
Take it away.
That was great, Chris. Thank you. Very practical stuff we can use right away. Lots of questions, and one is about medication. Do you believe that all the practical strategies you gave, how does medication fit into an overall plan in terms of following the external tools or external strategies that you suggested?
Okay. My personal belief is that, and experience, is that it takes a combination of medication and strategies to be successful. And here's why. There's a lot of research recently that said if you have two children who have ADHD, let's say, Wayne, you and Lily have ADHD, and Lily is compliant and takes her medication, and Wayne, you're a little rowdy and you're just refusing your medication. Well, guess what? Lily's brain is going to mature faster than yours. And it's not because of the medication. It's because the medication allows the child to learn. Learning changes the brain, not the medication. So, my 43-year-old son still takes medicine to this day. My 25-year-old grandson still takes medicine today. Some children, as they mature, will not need it. But, the research is clear. I know there are a lot of frightening articles out there that say, oh, don't medication use natural things. Well, unfortunately, natural things are also chemistry. They're chemicals, and there's no research on those. So that's all for that comment.
One parent is asking, what is your expert advice on how to deal with a teacher who just doesn't have any interest in accommodating my son other than using traditional ways? Is there a nice, friendly, productive way of approaching this?
Well, you've given me just enough to kind of struggle a bit with an answer. So some other questions that she would need to consider: do you have an IEP or 504 plan? Number one, is the teacher complying with that plan? If not, then you'd need to call another IEP or 504 meeting and say, these are not happening. Now, I do know years ago there was a case in West Virginia where a teacher, who also is an elected public official, refused to give accommodations, and he was sued and had to pay personally maybe $20,000 or so. Now, let me back up. I never encourage anybody to sue, because you often lose. You may win that short battle, but you're going to lose the war. So I would encourage you, is there another teacher from another year? Always try to be tactful. Who was really successful with your son before this teacher? Could you set up a meeting with the former teacher who's good and the new teacher who's not so good to see if you can do it in a positive, gentle way? we don't mean to, but all of us are human beings. And if we feel threatened, then we get defensive. And so I work very hard. As a former teacher, I have great respect for teachers. There are some who are just on top of it, and there's some who are reluctant and who don't believe ADHD is real. I hope that answer will suffice.
Mm-hmm. I think this one might be from a teacher, this question. Should kids with ADHD be given the unlimited opportunity of turning in all homework, projects, and work late without any problem? Or should they be held responsible as any other kid to turn in everything by the due date?
Well, I think there's never a simple answer to this. Initially, if a child is failing, then you want to let them turn in the assignments late. You can make accommodations. For example, is the test too long? Is the assignment too long? Does he have slow processing speed? So you have to have an assessment to know what the issue is. Then you've got to partner with the parents to work out a plan of, okay, so that means a lot of communication by email. And again, teachers think, well, he's 12. I shouldn't have to do that. Or he's 16. Well, guess what? You do. And so trying to shape his behavior from not being on time, giving him lots of praise when he is on time, and seeing, the questions are broad. So is this regard to homework only, or is it regard to tests? If it's homework, one of the things that two experts recommend is that the teacher sends homework to the parent. This homework should take your son 30 minutes. And I did this personally with a math teacher friend of mine. And then the kid sits down and does the homework, and the parent sends back a note and said, this took an hour and a half. Now, this is a true story for my son. Because he had slow processing speed and the working memory problems, it took him forever. Now, I suggest that teachers send homework tips home to parents, and I have handouts on that. I'd be happy to share. And one of the things that you can do is also set up a launch pad near the exit door. If it's the door to the garage, the door to the bus through the front, and that's where everything is put the night before. And the parents make sure homework is in the book bag. The book bag is there. The gym shorts, the musical instrument, whatever is there, so that there is less chance of forgetting. So, Wayne, you help me there. Without me seeing the questions, it's hard for me to make sure I covered everything. Do you have anything to add?
Just another question. I don't know. I think based on the information we got, that was helpful. I do.
Okay.
Several parents have had questions. You mentioned the prefrontal cortex is slow to develop, and they want to know at what age, excuse me, that the kids catch up.
Okay, here's how I would explain that. Is the brain continues to mature into our children's 30s, and I believe maybe into the 40s. So, for example, we know that they have a little burst of brain maturity in their 20s. You see that sometimes. So, the thing is, they need the prefrontal cortex the most while they are in school. Once they get out of school and in a job, and they will pursue a job that's a good fit for them, not like something related to school, so that they can learn to accommodate and use timers and phones to help keep them on task. So I don't think it matters if they ever totally catch up or not. My son is 43. He is doing very well. He is partners with his wife in real estate dealings. He handles all the filming, the drone filming of the residences they're selling. He's excellent with a camera, all the interior camera filming. You can be a successful, productive adult regardless of the level of your brain maturity at some level. I mean, I saw tremendous maturity throughout the years, and it's such a relief. You know, I used to say to parents, I would say, okay, here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is the brain is going to continue to mature. The bad news is it's going to be a long time before you see the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't think I've answered the question, repeat it for me, and I'll take another shot at it.
No, you did. You did. You mentioned in your presentation that punishments don't work with kids with ADHD. This parent is asking, or I might be a teacher, what is the best way to communicate with the student that they have done something good?
Well, you have to be genuine with your praise. And let me back up. One of the most important things teachers and parents can do is to maintain a positive relationship. Greet that kid every day at the door. Know his name. The younger kids these days are doing these little greetings, high five, hugs with their teachers. So that if you trust your teacher or trust your parent, you're going to be more likely to be eager to please them. And if they're eager to please them, they're really going to do well. So I think one teacher I know put 5 names on the board every day of somebody who was doing really well. Thank you, John, for picking up that pencil and handing it to Mary, or thank you for throwing the trash in the garbage, or thank you for helping. And so instead of the 5 names who were bad, put the 5 names up as a star group, the people who were helpful. Or, you give them a silent pull of your ear. You walk by, you pat them on the shoulder. Wow, you're working really hard. That's a tough one. You're making great progress. So it's to brag on their effort and less so on, you're a good boy kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they'll detect false praise pretty quickly.
Oh, my son would, and he'd think it's just you're just saying that because you're my mother. And I go, well, yeah, but it's true.
Right. Yeah. Can you give any kind of details about setting up maybe an ADD-friendly classroom, maybe in the physical layout of it, or?
I'd have to think about that.
Maybe predictability in terms of...
Okay. All right. Thank you for... Yeah, all right, I have a confession here. I have executive function deficits because I had chemotherapy 16 years ago. So retrieving information from my working memory and recall is tough. And so sometimes it takes me a minute more to find it. But you hit it. You need structure. You need routine. They need to know what to expect. There has to be a place where you put your homework. There is a place where the pencils are. Don't make a big deal if a kid doesn't have a pencil. Have a pencil. You can have one of these pencils if you're out. I like the working in pairs. Alex had to do a notebook for his science in high school by himself with no support. You write down every assignment, and it's got to be in order, and you have to take the worksheet and put it in this notebook. What my sister is doing by pairing them is to let them help each other. And the other thing my sister does while they're doing that is she walks around the room and gives individualized instruction. And so she'll say, all right, take another look at this one. So she does something, my sister has ADHD, and I adore her. And she is an extraordinary teacher and has the highest test scores, and it's because of her teaching strategies. But, any kind of sending home an attagirl or an attaboy, just an email. John was helpful today. And this is, not all kids need that, particularly if they're just getting started on the right track. Praise,
Mm-hmm.
and letting the parents know, too. Because when parents get a note, they expect it to be negative.
Right, exactly. Are there any ways that parents, this is not in an arrogant type of way, that parents who know all about ADHD can sort of clue teachers in who might not have the exact same knowledge base?
Yes, I suggest doing it very subtly.
Right.
Sometimes, like, I have a sheet called 10 Key Facts. It's available on my website, and I think I have it. Again, people can email me, and I would be happy to give them this. So, it almost, poor parents, you have to become a counselor. So you have to know how to help people feel comfortable and not defensive. So you say to her, I attended this webinar yesterday with Chris, and she gave me this, and I thought you might be interested in it, and give her one sheet at a time. Go to your guidance counselor. Ask her, how can I help this teacher understand it better? I've had schools that invite me in to do training for the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might seek that kind of training for the school. Or if you, this small town stuff here, if you know someone who knows the teacher who has a kid with ADHD, just get them to kind of casually say something. So I was a lobbyist for several years, so I'm always trying to analyze, okay, this is my goal, helping this teacher understand ADHD. Share our iceberg with them. That speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm.
That shows how complex it is, and you can say, well, I used to think that ADHD was just simple misbehavior, but just look at this, how complicated it is.
Mm-hmm. Very quickly, do you have any tips or strategies for helping kids? A lot of parents talk about their child being challenged by trying to memorize things. I know you might have mentioned a couple of things in your slide. Do you have anything else up your sleeve in terms of helping a kid memorize?
Yeah, for example, times tables the fun way will help, and they have it for addition, subtraction, will help you memorize because it has stories to go with it. Anything you can do that's physical. One physician here who had a daughter with ADHD, let her write her words on the shower wall in the steam. Use Scrabble letters to work on spelling words. I'm trying to think. There are other things than just that.
Right.
For example, the foldables can help you memorize that. And there was another clue. For example, it's and I didn't include that slide, but you include mnemonics, and the question would be like, in World War II, who were the countries that were involved? And so, and dang it, I'm not going to be able to accurately describe it. But I created a graph, and the initials were, the acronym that went with the words were RAN. And so I created a graphic in like a piece of graphic paper, and they were dancing across the axis. So we were talking about the axis powers. Now, these are not easy to create. So don't test me on my history, but just trust me that there were three countries. The RAN were in the axis powers. I assume that was Russia and whoever. But they're hard to create. But, so they're going to go into that test and they're going to see. They're going to know the axis powers. Or create in drawings on the wall in their room. All right, here is Germany, here is England. so that they can visualize it. Anything that you can do with something they have to memorize to help them visualize it will be very helpful. Talk about it, discuss it, and it's not easy.
No, that's time intensive and also draws on your creative powers as well. Yeah, I can see that. One thing I wanted you to talk about is, and I know you wrote an article about this, but kids acting up in classrooms and how kids with ADHD or LD might be, teachers might misinterpret that as them just being sort of a bad apple, rather than the fact that it could be tied to the fact, of the child not really understanding what he's supposed to do on an assignment.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you could sort of link all that and shed some light on how acting up is not just tied to just a kid acting inappropriately.
Well, there's a saying that children would rather be viewed as being bad than being dumb. So if they don't know the answer, then, and plus you have the problem with our slow processors who can't absorb what they're being asked. So one way for teachers to do that is before class say, all right, John, I'm going to ask you this question. Here it is. So he has the question in front of him, and he has time to think about it. It's just our kids have trouble quickly retrieving information. And so it makes them feel stupid.
Right. Okay, well, I think the hour is close to being up. So everyone had lots of great questions, and Chris, you had great insights about all of this. I'm sure everybody's going to be able to take something away from this to improve the situation in the classroom or at home. So I really thank you for being here.
I'm always delighted for the opportunity to help parents and families because my husband and I and my family have lived it, and we've been blessed that our kids are doing well. So thanks again for the invitation, and thanks to all of you who attended, who listened.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll repeat that. Thanks to all of the attendees for being here, and hope you will attend next week's webinar on September 25th, when Roberto Olivardia will explain the relationship between ADHD and sleep and how important sound sleep is to optimizing the ADHD brain in children and adults. So thanks for attending today's webinar once again, and have a great day.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.